Good evening and welcome to CYC News for today, the 15th of February 2015 and the 8th of Amshir 1731 AM. I'm Leanne Gabriel. In today's headlines, Pope Tawadros speaks about Copts in Iraq and Syria forced to leave their churches and homes. ISIS publish photos of Coptic Christians kidnapped in Libya. Christians in Iraq and Syria faced the worst genocide since the Armenian Genocide of 1915. The Prime Minister of France calls for the countering of Brotherhood and Salafi groups. Difficulties face the construction of a church at the Coptic Hospital in Alexandria. And the Australians claim an 111-run win over England in the World Cup opener. Our top story tonight, Pope Tawadros II of Alexandria has presided over the third week of prayer for the unity of churches at St. Mark's Cathedral in Cairo. His Holiness welcomed all the religious leaders from the Christian churches, the Council of the Churches of Egypt, and the Middle East Council of Churches. Pope Tawadros says that this week is dedicated in all the churches to meditation on Jesus' meeting with the Samaritan woman. The Pope spoke about the forced abandonment taking place as displaced Christians in Iraq and Syria are forced to leave their churches and homes involuntarily. He likened it to the captivity in the Bible, which was also involuntary. His Holiness says, wars and violence are prevalent in countries of the world and they're caused because of spiritual hunger, because people who spread violence are seeking satisfaction in this life only, which cannot provide real satisfaction. An ISIS website has published photos of Coptic Christians kidnapped in Libya, wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffed. The masked men had taken them to a beach where the Copts appeared in photos, shown in the same position that Western media professionals were presented in before their murder. All of the kidnapped Christians are from Minya, Upper Egypt, and went to Libya to work in construction. The so-called Tripoli Information Office of ISIS published 12 photos of the kidnapped Copts. The statement published on Thursday declared that the kidnapped are detained captives in revenge for what is happening to Muslims in the West. Armed militants broke into a housing compound in January, abducting 13 Egyptian Christians. More recently, another 7 Egyptian Christians have been abducted and 3 members of a Christian family murdered. Libya has seen a state of chaos reach its peak in recent weeks as the lives of Egyptian Christians are threatened. Habib Afram, the Syriac League president, has declared that Christians in Iraq and Syria face the worst genocide since the Armenian Genocide of 1915. In his address at a dinner hosted by the Assyrian National Council in Chicago, Afram says, "We must revolt and reject the status quo. We need to think differently and be united regardless of our different denominations and parties." Speaking to over 400 Eastern Christians at the event, he emphasised that concerted efforts are necessary to keep the role of Christians in the region to make balance, peace and modernisation. Syriac Catholic Patriarch Ignatius Yusuf has urged displaced Christians to stay at home and not to emigrate abroad. This came during the Patriarch's visit to camps and compounds for displaced Christians in the provinces of Dohak and Erbil in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. The Patriarch stressed the importance of the steadfastness of the displaced Christians, despite the difficult conditions they face and the lack of services provided to them. Patriarch Ignatius also called on international coalition forces, the Iraqi army and the Peshmerga forces to quickly liberate the Nineveh Plain areas and to secure the return of those displaced to their homes. The Patriarch and his accompanying delegation also visited the Interior Minister Karim Sinjari in the government of the Kurdistan region of Iraq. The two parties discussed the situation of displaced people, particularly Christians, and the need to provide them with safety. The Patriarch thanked the Kurdistan regional government for receiving thousands of Christians displaced from their historical areas in the Nineveh province and thanked the Kurdish Peshmerga forces for confronting the terrorists, offering condolences to the Peshmerga martyrs. He called for the providing of basic services to the displaced citizens, and Sinjari stressed that the Kurdish armed forces would liberate the land as quickly as possible. He added that all the capabilities of the region are dedicated to serve displaced people, noting that displaced Christians are an essential part of the region's population and partners of the land. Chaldean Archbishop Bashar Warda of Erbil says Iraq's Christian communities have fallen dramatically over the last decade since the rule of Saddam Hussein. In front of a gathering of bishops and priests in the UK, as well as members from the House of Commons, the Archbishop of Erbil says Christians in Iraq do not have much time left without direct military action on the ground. In an interview with BBC, he says airstrikes were not enough to defeat Islamic State militants. He added that the situation is worse for the world than what happened in Afghanistan, with more and more young people going to fight with Daesh, and that military action is needed to get them out of the villages. Archbishop Warda called for the deployment of British troops on the ground to drive Daesh out of the Christian villages in the Nineveh Plain. He added that Christians are decreasing in number as tens of thousands of Iraqi Christians fled their homes in the summer of 2014, following warnings from IS militants to renounce their faith or face death. The home of a Coptic Christian, Abdel Shahid Tawfiq, has been set alight and burnt in the Samran district of El Arish. On Thursday, Tawfiq told the Arish prosecution that 15 masked gunmen broke into his home in the early hours of the morning, opened fire, then burnt his house and all of its contents. Abanoob Gerges, coordinator of the Coalition of Egypt's Copts in Arish, has told MCN that when the homeowner heard the sound of gunfire, he, his 4 children and his wife fled from the other door. He believes the reasons for targeting this man were purely sectarian and that they intended to break into the house in order to kill the residents, as they were the only Coptic home in the area. He says he will now try to communicate with the state in order to compensate the man whose home was burnt and now has no place to live. French Prime Minister Manuel Valls has called for the countering of Muslim Brotherhood and Salafist groups in a speech on Monday. On Europe's first radio station, Valls says we should counter the Muslim Brotherhood speech in our country and Salafi groups in slums. He spoke about sensitive areas where poverty is exacerbated in the country's major cities, which include a large proportion of immigrants, mostly Muslims. In response to a question about how to combat these groups, Valls says this should be through law, police and intelligence services, and that no religion should impose its discourse on our neighbourhoods. The Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Matthias I, has visited Sudan, accompanied by a number of priests and the ambassador of Ethiopia to Sudan. The Patriarch was received by the Under-Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Abdallah Hamad Al-Azraq. They discussed the situation of the Ethiopian community and churches in Sudan, as well as the firm historic ties between the Sudanese and Ethiopian peoples. Ambassador Al-Azraq welcomed the visiting Ethiopian church's delegation, affirming that Ethiopians in Sudan are practicing their prayers and religious rites in full freedom. He said that Ethiopians in Sudan are not treated as aliens and receive support and facilities at all levels. He appreciated the firmness of the fraternal relations between the two nations. His Holiness Pope Tawadros II has met with the Russian Orthodox Church delegation, headed by the chairman of Foreign Relations Committee of the Russian Church. The visit was aimed to discuss aspects of cooperation between the Russian and Coptic churches. His Holiness Pope Tawadros has previously dealt with His Holiness Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia during his visit to the Russian Orthodox Church last October. There they discussed the protocol of cooperation between the two churches and established 2 committees that were formed for each church. The recent meetings were held by the Joint Committee of the Churches and worked to develop the first worksheet that explains the mechanism for cooperation between the churches. During their visit, the Russian Orthodox Church delegation also visited St. Mark's Shrine in St. Mark's Cathedral in Cairo. St. Mary's Church at the Coptic Hospital in Alexandria is facing difficulties in completing its construction despite obtaining a building permit 13 years ago. In 1964, the late President Gamal Abdel Nasser issued a decision to establish a treatment foundation in Alexandria to be owned by the Coptic Hospital. Sameh Zaghloul, the church's lawyer, says that a decision was issued in 2002 by the Alexandria Central District that approved development for the church and by building a separate entrance, a back staircase, and 2 rooms for services. The church began the construction in accordance with the license issued, but the work was stopped by the director of the Treatment Foundation, who managed to get a resolution to ban the license issued by the Central District. The Treatment Foundation that owns the hospital filed a lawsuit before the State Council to revoke the license, but the court dropped the case for lack of jurisdiction. The foundation filed a report to the public prosecution claiming fraud in the license issued to the church, but the report was also dropped. The church's lawyer says Major General Abdel Salam Mahgoub, governor of Alexandria at the time, ratified the construction of the church 5 times, and the Treatment Foundation tried to prevent the implementation of those decisions every time. Since 2002, the directors of the treatment institution, including a Coptic director, have been preventing the development of the church. The church's lawyer expressed to MCN his surprise at the approach of the foundation towards the church. He says all this is happening while they have formal ownership since 1953 from the real estate department, which proves that the Coptic Hospital in Alexandria is a charity owned by the Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria for the treatment of Coptic poor people. The Treatment Foundation, however, has seized the hospital and prevented any completion of the construction of the church. Hamdi Asyuti, the lawyer of a Coptic Christian Michael Munir Bishay, has been accused of contempt of Islam, according to a judge. The prosecution have denied requests from the defence to review and copy case files in contravention of the law. Asyuti told MCN that photocopying the papers of the case and reviewing them is one of the rights of defence, according to the Article 52 of the Code of Legal Practice. The head of the Balkaz District Court, Chancellor Ahmed Ibrahim, refused to permit the lawyer to photocopy the papers of the case and asked him to submit a formal request. He submitted the request, but the Chancellor permitted him to review the papers without making a photocopy. Instead, he is forced to read the papers and write down the important parts. Security forces arrested Bishay from the Demian village in Balkaz for contempt of Islam after he shared an episode of Tony Khalifa's program on Al-Kahira Wal Nas on his Facebook page. The guest of the episode was Sheikh Mohammed Abdallah Al-Nasr. Militants in the village later attacked his family's home. To the Netherlands, Bishop Arsani, the Bishop of the Netherlands, has visited the Jordanian embassy in order to offer condolences for the Jordanian pilot Maaz Kazazbeh. His Grace Bishop Arsani was received by Ahmed Mofleh, the ambassador of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan in the Netherlands. His Grace wrote a message in the Book of Condolence expressing his solidarity with the people of Jordan and the King of Jordan, Abdallah bin al-Hussein, in facing the force of terrorism. He emphasised the importance of resistance in the current circumstances. And our final story ends in victory as the Australian cricket team defeat England in a staggering 111-run triumph. Opening batsman Aaron Finch blasted 135 at his home ground to lay the platform for victory as the co-hosts piled on 9 for 342 runs, shy of the venue's one-day international record. The match ended in an odd manner, with Taylor initially dismissed for a leg before wicket. However, he successfully had the decision overturned on review, but was denied the chance of a century after a second review showed Maxwell had thrown down the stumps with James Anderson short of his ground. A special Valentine's Day victory for the Australians, surely celebrated with their loved ones. And that's all for CYC News. Stay tuned for more Christian content on CYC. I'm Leanne Gabriel from the CYC studios in Sydney, Australia. Good night and God bless.